I have been barren for decades. Now they want to use this for sacrifice? Never. They'd rather be with me than be dead.
Now I will have kids to call my own. Now I can wipe away the tears of my husband.
They called her a barren witch, a woman cursed by the gods because her womb remained silent. But when desperation drove her to steal 2 twin babies marked for death from a forbidden shrine, she didn't just find motherhood. She unleashed a flood of miraculous blessings that terrified her village so much, they dug up her darkest secret to destroy her. What they found, however, would force even the most powerful king to kneel. The weight of silence. The harmattan wind swept through the village of Agadei, carrying with it the fine, cold dust that settled on every leaf and roof like a ghost's caress. It was during this season, when the skies were gray and the air was thin, that the women of the village would gather at the stream to fetch water, their wooden buckets balanced gracefully on their heads, their conversations a steady hum beneath the crackling of dry palm fronds. But Agadei no longer went to the stream. For 15 years, she had made that journey. For 15 years, she had endured the sideways glances, the pitying sighs, and the pointed silence that fell over the other women whenever she dipped her calabash into the water. For 15 years, she had listened to them speak of their children, of Kwame who had cut his first tooth, of Amara who had spoken her first word, of little Chitty who had been sent to live with his grandmother to learn the ways of the ancestors. And for 15 years, Agadei had returned to her hut with a full bucket and an empty heart. Her husband, Okoro, was a patient man. In the early years of their marriage, he had gone with her to the shrine of Ogun, the god of iron and war, leaving offerings of kola nut and palm oil. They had visited the oracle in the next village, a wizened old woman who threw cowrie shells and read the patterns of the future in their fall. They had consulted the Muslim alpha who wrote verses from the Quran on a wooden slate, washed the ink into a calabash, and made her drink the holy water.
They had done everything the elders advised, everything the ancestors demanded, and still her belly remained flat. "It is the curse of your mother's sister," one woman had whispered to her years ago, her voice dripping with the cruelty of assumed truth. "She died childless, and her spirit is jealous. She is sitting on your womb." Agadei had wept for days after that. She had never known her mother's sister, had never even seen her face, and yet this ghost she could not remember was being blamed for the silence in her body. By the time the 10th year of her marriage passed, Agadei had learned to build walls around her heart. She stopped going to the village gatherings. She stopped attending the weddings where pregnant brides were celebrated. She stopped visiting the naming ceremonies where newborn infants were presented to the ancestors with prayers and libations. She stayed in her hut, tending her small garden of peppers and okra, and she waited for death to release her from a life that felt incomplete. Koro, to his credit, never took a second wife. His friends urged him to, reminding him that a man's name must live on through his children, that the ancestors would be angry if there was no one to pour libations for him when he died. But Okoro would shake his head and say, "Agadei is my wife. The gods have their reasons. I will wait." But even Okoro's patience had begun to fray. The last time they had gone to the oracle, the old woman had thrown the cowries and sat in silence for a long time. "The spirits say there is a blockage," the oracle had finally said, her voice thin and reedy like wind through dry grass. "A door that was closed before you were born. It will take something powerful to open it. Something forbidden." "What?" Koro had asked, leaning forward. "Anything. We will give anything." But the oracle had only shaken her head. "The time is not yet. When it comes, you will know. But you must be brave. What is offered may not be what you expect." They had returned home with more questions than answers, and the weight of those unanswered questions settled over their hut like the harmattan dust. Fine, pervasive, and impossible to fully sweep away. The law of the land. In Agadei, as in many villages across the Niger Delta in those days, the birth of twins was considered an abomination. The belief was ancient, older than the oldest baobab tree that stood at the center of the village square. The elders taught that when a woman gave birth to 2 children at once, it meant that one of them had been fathered by an evil spirit. A demon had crept into the hut at night and planted its seed alongside the husbands, and the two babies, one human, one spirit, could not be allowed to live together. To do so would invite calamity upon the entire village. Crops would fail. Hunting would become barren. Sickness would sweep through the huts like fire through dry bush. And so the law was clear: twins must die. The method varied from place to place. In some villages along the coast, the twins were placed in clay pots and thrown into the river as an offering to Alakan, the goddess of the deep waters. In others, they were taken to the evil forest, a dark, forbidden grove where the spirits of the unquiet dead were said to dwell, and left there to perish from hunger or be taken by the leopards that prowled at night. In Agadei, the practice was to break the twins' necks at the edge of the village and bury them in shallow graves beyond the last yam patch, where their restless spirits could not find their way back to haunt the living. The mother of twins was also punished. She was considered unclean, tainted by her congress with the spirit world. She would be forced to pay a heavy fine, kegs of palm oil, tubers of yam, baskets of kola nut, to the priests who performed the purification rites. Often, her husband would abandon her, unable to bear the shame and the cost. Sometimes, she would be driven from the village entirely, left to wander the bush roads until she found refuge in one of the Christian missionary settlements that had begun to appear along the coast. It was into this world, with its harsh laws and its unforgiving spirits, that Agadei's desperation would lead her down a path from which there could be no return. The night of screams. The night it happened was moonless, the kind of night when the village of Agadei held its breath. The stars were hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the only light came from the occasional flicker of fireflies dancing among the palm trees. It was the kind of night when spirits were said to walk, and sensible people stayed inside their huts with the doors barred and the cooking fires burning bright. Agadei had not been able to sleep. For weeks she had heard whispers. A woman in the next compound, a young wife named Ayabo, had grown heavy with child, her belly swelling to an enormous size that made the other women nod knowingly and mutter behind their hands. She carries more than one, they said. The gods have cursed her. Twins. Agadei had watched Ayabo from a distance, noting the fear that had begun to creep into the younger woman's eyes as her time grew near. She had seen Ayabo's husband, a stern-faced carver named Abadil, meeting with the chief priest in the shadows of the village square. She had heard the drums that beat through the night, the ones that signaled that preparations were being made. And tonight, she had heard the screams. They cut through the darkness like a machete through ripe plantain, high, keening wails of agony and terror. Ayabo's time had come, but these were not the screams of a woman in labor. These were the screams of a woman who knew she was giving birth to death. Agadei's body moved before her mind could stop it. She pulled her wrapper tight around her waist, slipped out of her hut, and crept through the shadows toward the compound where Ayabo lived. She told herself she was only curious, only concerned. She told herself she would only watch from a distance. But when she reached the edge of the compound, what she saw froze the blood in her veins. The chief priest stood in the center of the courtyard, his body painted in white chalk, his face hidden behind a wooden mask carved with leering eyes and bared teeth. In his hands, he held a long, curved knife that glinted in the light of the palm oil lamps. Around him stood the elders of the village, their faces stern and unreadable. And at his feet, lying on a mat spread over the hard-packed earth, was Ayabo, her body slick with sweat and blood, her eyes wild with grief. Between her legs, two tiny forms squirmed and mewled. Twins, a boy and a girl. The priest raised his knife, and the villagers began to chant. A low, rhythmic drone that seemed to rise from the very earth itself. Agadei watched in horror as he knelt beside the babies, as he reached for the first one, the boy, and wrapped his hand around its tiny neck. Something inside Agadei snapped. She did not plan what happened next. She did not think, did not reason, did not calculate the consequences. She simply moved. Later, she would not be able to explain how she crossed the distance so quickly, how she pushed through the circle of elders without being stopped, how she found herself standing over the priest with her hands wrapped around his wrist, pulling his hand away from the baby's throat. No! The scream tore from her throat, raw and animal. You cannot. You cannot kill what the gods have given. For one frozen moment, everyone in the courtyard stared at her in shock. The chant died. The priest's mask turned toward her, the empty eye holes seeming to bore into her soul. Then the elders erupted. Woman, do you know what you have done? Seize her. She has profaned the ritual. She is mad. The spirits have taken her mind. Hands grabbed her, pulled her away. The priest rose to his feet, his knife still gleaming. He said nothing, but through the holes in his mask, his eyes burned with cold fury. And then, in the chaos, something extraordinary happened. Agadei, exhausted, bleeding, half dead from the ordeal, lifted her head and looked directly at Agadei. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a wordless understanding passed between them. Agadei's gaze shifted to her babies, then back to Agadei. She nodded, just once, but it was enough. Take them, Agadei whispered, so softly that only Agadei could hear. They will die here. Take them and save them. Please. Agadei did not hesitate. She wrenched herself free from the hands that held her. How, she would never know, and dropped to her knees beside the twins. In one swift motion, she scooped them up, pressing their tiny, warm bodies against her chest. They were so small, so fragile, their skin slick with the fluid of birth, their cries thin and reedy like the mewling of kittens. Then she ran. Behind her, she heard the shouts of the villagers, the pounding of feet, the angry roar of the priest demanding that she be caught. But Agadei had lived in this village her entire life. She knew every path, every hidden trail, every hollow log and thicket of bush. She did not run toward her own hut. They would look there first. Instead, she ran toward the one place no one would follow. The evil forest, the shrine in the darkness. The evil forest was not merely a place. It was a presence. From the time they were children, the people of Agadei were taught to fear it. It was where the bodies of those who died unclean were left to rot. It was where the masks of the dreaded Oro cult were stored when not in use. It was where the spirits of those who had been murdered, those who had committed suicide, those who had died with unfinished business were said to dwell, forever restless, forever angry. No one entered the evil forest. No one except the highest-ranking priests during the most sacred rituals, and even they did not stay long. Agadei plunged into its depths without looking back. The moment she crossed the tree line, the world changed. The night, which had been merely dark, became absolute. The sounds of pursuit, the shouts, the pounding feet, the angry drums, faded as if swallowed by a great beast. In their place came new sounds. The rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth, the hooting of owls that sounded like demonic laughter, the distant roar of leopards on the hunt. Agadei ran until her legs burned and her lungs screamed for air. She ran until she could run no more. And then, when she finally stopped, collapsing against the twisted trunk of an ancient Irako tree, she found that she had arrived at a place she had only ever heard of in whispers. The Shrine of the Forgotten. It stood in a small clearing, half hidden by creeping vines and hanging moss. A low structure built of weathered wood and dried palm fronds, its roof sagging with age, its walls stained dark with the blood of countless sacrifices. Before it stood a collection of wooden figures, some crudely carved, some surprisingly detailed, representing the spirits of twins who had been killed over the generations. Offerings of dried palm oil, stale cola nuts, and the bleached bones of small animals lay scattered at their feet. Agadei stared at the shrine, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was a place of death, a place of sorrow, a place where the spirits of innocent babies cried out in the night for the lives they had been denied. And yet, as she looked down at the twins in her arms, still alive, still warm, still miraculously breathing, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. I have nothing, she whispered to the darkness, to the spirits, to whatever gods might be listening. I have no children of my own. My womb is as barren as this forest is dark. But these babies are alive. If you are spirits, if you have power, then you know that their lives are not their fault. They did not ask to be born. They did not ask to be twins. They only asked to live. The forest was silent. Even the owls had stopped their calling. "I will take them," Agadei continued, her voice growing stronger. "I will raise them as my own. I will love them, feed them, protect them. And in return, I ask only that you do not curse me, that you do not haunt me, that you let them live." She knelt before the shrine, the twins still pressed against her chest, and she waited. For what, she did not know. A sign. Punishment. A bolt of lightning from the cloudless sky. Instead, she felt something she had not felt in years, warmth. It began in her chest, where the twins lay, and spread outward through her body, chasing away the cold, chasing away the fear, chasing away the desperate emptiness that had lived inside her for so long. It was as if the spirits of the shrine, the countless stolen babies, the countless grieving mothers, had reached out and wrapped her in an embrace. When she finally rose to her feet, the first gray light of dawn was beginning to filter through the trees. The night was over, and Agadei, the barren woman of Agadei, was no longer alone. The hut at the edge of the village. Agadei did not return to Agadei. She could not. To go back would mean death for her and for the twins. Instead, she made her way to the abandoned hunter's hut at the far edge of the evil forest, a place so remote that even the bravest hunters gave it a wide berth. It was little more than 4 walls and a leaky roof, but it was shelter. It was safety. And it was home. For the first few weeks, Agadei existed in a state of constant terror. Every rustle of leaves, every distant voice on the wind, every unexpected shadow made her heart leap into her throat. She expected the priest's men to find her at any moment, expected to feel rough hands grabbing her, expected to hear the cold pronouncement of her sentence. Death for stealing what was meant for the gods. But the days passed, and no one came. The villagers of Agadei, it seemed, believed she had died in the evil forest. They told themselves that the spirits had claimed her, that her bones were now scattered among the roots of the Irako tree, that justice had been served. They did not speak of her, did not mourn her, did not come looking for her body. She was simply gone. And so Agadei began her new life. She named the twins Taiwo and Kahine, the traditional names for the firstborn and secondborn of twins, names that meant the one who tastes the world and the one who comes after. Taiwo was the boy, strong and quiet, with his father's stern brow and his mother's deep, thoughtful eyes. Kahine was the girl, smaller and more delicate, but with a spirit that burned bright and fierce. Agadei loved them with an intensity that surprised her. She had spent 15 years longing for a child, and now she had 2. She did not think about the fact that they were not hers by blood. She did not think about the night she had stolen them, about the priest's knife, about Ayabo's whispered plea. She thought only about the present moment, about the way Taiwo's hand curled around her finger, about the soft sound of Kahine's breathing as she slept, about the warmth of 2 small bodies pressed against her in the cold harmattan nights. She survived by gathering wild yams and mushrooms from the forest, by setting snares for small game, by trading with a sympathetic woman from a neighboring village who asked no questions and accepted her silence in exchange for palm oil and dried fish. It was a hard life, a lonely life, but it was a life filled with love. And then the blessings began. The strange gifts. It started with small things. One morning, Agadei went to check her yam traps in the forest. Hollowed-out pits covered with leaves, designed to catch the wild boars that roamed the undergrowth. She had set 3 traps the week before, but had caught nothing. Today, however, when she approached the first trap, she found it filled to overflowing with yams. Not the small, wild tubers she usually gathered, but enormous, cultivated yams of a size and quality she had not seen since leaving the village. She stared at them in disbelief. Yams did not grow in pits. Yams grew in tended fields, planted and harvested by human hands. And yet here they were, piled high as if someone or something had gathered them and placed them there as an offering. She took them home, her mind racing with questions she could not answer. That night, she and the twins ate better than they had in months. A few days later, she found a bolt of fine cloth, the kind worn by chiefs and their wives, hanging from a branch near her hut. The cloth was clean, unworn, and dyed a deep, rich indigo that caught the light like water. Agadei touched it with trembling fingers, half expecting it to vanish like a dream. It did not. She used the cloth to make clothes for Taiwo and Kahind, tiny wrappers and shirts that kept them warm through the cold nights. Then came the gifts she could not explain at all. One evening, as she sat outside her hut with Taiwo in her lap and Kahind sleeping on a mat beside her, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Agadei's heart seized in her chest. Had they found her? But as the figure drew closer, she saw that it was not one of the priest's men. It was an old woman, ancient and bent, leaning on a staff carved with symbols Agadei did not recognize. "Do not be afraid," the old woman said, her voice like dry leaves skittering across hard ground. "I have come to thank you." "Thank me?" Agadei clutched Taiwo tighter. "For what?" "For the children." The old woman's eyes, milky with age, seemed to look through Agadei and into some other world. "I was Ayabo's grandmother. I died before she was born. I could not protect her. I could not protect her babies. But you did what I could not." Agadei's breath caught in her throat. "You are a spirit?" "I am what I am." The old woman smiled, and her face, which had seemed terrifying, suddenly radiated warmth. "The twins you saved are not ordinary children. They carry the blessing of the ancestors, the ones who were killed, the ones who were never allowed to live. Their survival has opened a door. Blessings will flow through that door. To you, to them, to anyone who shows them kindness." And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, the old woman was gone. Agadei sat in the darkness for a long time, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. When she finally went inside, she found that the fire, which had been dying, had flared back to life on its own, casting warm light over the sleeping twins. The blessings had begun. The river of plenty. As Taiwo and Kahind grew, so too did the miracles. It became impossible to ignore. When Agadei went to the stream to fetch water, her bucket would be filled not just with water, but with small fish, enough to feed the family for days. When she gathered firewood, she would find that the wood burned longer and hotter than any wood had a right to, lasting through the coldest nights without needing to be replenished. When she planted seeds in the small garden behind her hut, they would sprout overnight and bear fruit in weeks instead of months. The hut itself seemed to transform. The leaky roof repaired itself. The crumbling walls grew strong. The dirt floor, which had always been hard-packed and dusty, became smooth and clean, as if swept by invisible hands. But the most remarkable changes were in the twins themselves. Taiwo developed a gift for healing. When Agadei cut her hand on a sharp stone, the wound closed before her eyes as Taiwo touched it, his small face concentrated and serious. When a trader's child fell from a tree and broke his arm, Taiwo laid his hands on the limb and the bone knit itself together, the child's screams turning to laughter as the pain vanished. Kahind, meanwhile, seemed to have power over the natural world. Birds would come when she called them, perching on her shoulders and singing in response to her childish babble. The wild animals of the forest, the shy dikers, the cautious bush pigs, even the leopards that prowled at night, would approach her without fear, nuzzling her hands as if she were one of their own. Agadei watched these developments with a mixture of wonder and terror. She had known, from the moment she saved the twins, that they were special. But she had not imagined this. She had not imagined that the blessings of the ancestors would flow so powerfully, so visibly, through these two small children. As the years passed and the twins grew into childhood, the news of Agadei's good fortune began to spread. It started with the traders who passed near her hut, the ones who had always accepted her silence and asked no questions. They noticed the quality of the yams she brought to trade, the fineness of the cloth she wore, the health and beauty of the children at her side. They noticed and they talked. "Have you seen the woman who lives near the evil forest? The one they say is cursed? Cursed? Have you seen her yams? Have you seen her children? That woman is blessed, I tell you. Blessed by something powerful." The whispers reached Agadei eventually. They reached the ears of the chief priest. They reached the ears of the elders. And they reached the ears of the new king, a young, ambitious man named Oba Adedala, who had taken the throne just 2 years before and was eager to prove his power. "Bring this woman to me," the Oba commanded. "I would see for myself the source of her blessings." The discovery. Agadei knew the moment had come when she saw the messengers approaching her hut. There were 5 of them, young men in the distinctive cloth of the Oba's personal guard, their faces stern, their hands resting on the hilts of their sheathed machetes. They did not threaten her, did not touch her, did not raise their voices. They simply stood at the edge of her clearing and waited. "The Oba summons you," the leader said. "You and your children. You will come with us." Agadei looked at Taiwo and Kahind, now 7 years old, standing close to her side. She looked at the hut that had been her home for so long, at the garden that had flourished under her care, at the forest that had protected her. And she knew that the time of hiding was over. "I will come," she said. "But these children have done nothing wrong. They are innocent." The leader's face did not change expression. "The Oba will judge." The journey back to Agadei was the longest walk of Agadei's life. She had not set foot in the village since that terrible night 7 years ago, and every step brought back memories she had tried so hard to bury. She remembered Ayabo's screams. She remembered the priest's knife. She remembered the weight of the twins in her arms as she ran into the darkness. When they entered the village square, Agadei saw that the entire population had gathered. The Oba sat on his carved wooden throne beneath the great baobab tree, his face unreadable. Beside him stood the chief priest, the same man who had raised his knife to kill the twins, now older but no less terrifying in his ceremonial robes. And in the crowd, Agadei saw a face she had never expected to see again. Ayabo, the woman who had given birth to Taiwo and Kahind, stood at the edge of the square, her body thin and worn, her eyes hollow with grief. She had been punished, Agadei realized. After the failed sacrifice, after the twins had been stolen, the village had turned its wrath on her. Her husband had abandoned her. She had been forced to pay the heavy fine for the birth of twins. Even though the babies had not been killed, she had become an outcast in her own home, a living reminder of the abomination that had occurred. When Ayabo's eyes fell on the twins, on Taiwo and Kahind, now 7 years old and beautiful, she let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Agadei's heart clenched with pain. She wanted to run to Ayabo to explain, to beg forgiveness. But before she could move, the Oba raised his hand for silence. "Agadei," the Oba said, his voice carrying across the silent square, "you stand accused of a grave crime. 7 years ago, you interfered with a sacred ritual. You stole what was meant for the gods. You defied the laws of this village and the will of the ancestors. What do you say to these charges?" Agadei looked at the Oba. She looked at the priest with his cold, unforgiving eyes. She looked at the villagers who had once shunned her for her barrenness. And then she looked at Taiwo and Kahind, standing beside her with the innocent courage of children who had done nothing wrong. "I say," Agadei replied, her voice steady, "that I saved 2 innocent lives. I say that these children, whom you would have killed, are not a curse. They are a blessing. Look at them. Look at what they have become." As if on cue, a flock of birds descended from the sky, settling on Kahind's shoulders and arms, their songs filling the silence. A breeze stirred the air, not the harsh, dry wind of the harmattan, but a soft, gentle breeze that carried the scent of rain and flowers. And Taiwo stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the Oba. "You are in pain," Taiwo said softly. "Your leg, the old wound from the battle. It troubles you." The Oba's eyes widened. It was true. Years ago, before he became king, he had fought in a skirmish with a neighboring village, and a spear had pierced his thigh. The wound had healed, but it had never fully stopped hurting. On some days, the pain was so bad he could barely walk. "May I?" Taiwo asked, stepping closer. The guards moved to stop him, but the Oba raised his hand. "Let him come." Taiwo approached the throne and knelt before the Oba. He placed his small hands on the king's leg, over the place where the old wound lay hidden beneath his robes. He closed his eyes. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the Oba gasped. The pain, the constant, nagging ache that had been his companion for years was gone, vanished, as if it had never existed. He looked at Taiwo with something like fear in his eyes. "Who are you?" the Oba whispered. "What are you?" But before Taiwo could answer, the chief priest stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "Witchcraft," he shouted. "The boy practices witchcraft. This is proof of what I have always said. Twins are abominations. They bring evil. They must be destroyed." The crowd murmured, uncertain. Some nodded in agreement with the priest. Others looked at the healed king, at the bird still perched on Kahind, at the strange peace that seemed to have settled over the square. And then Ayabo spoke. "No." Her voice was small, barely more than a whisper, but in the silence, it carried like a bell. "No," she said again, stepping forward. "They are not evil. They are my children, and they were never meant to die." The mother's testimony. Ayabo walked to the center of the square, her eyes fixed on Taiwo and Kahind. They looked at her with curiosity. They did not know her, did not know that she had carried them in her body, that she had risked her life to bring them into the world. 7 years ago, Ayabo began, her voice growing stronger. "I gave birth to these twins. I knew what would happen. I knew the law. I knew they would be killed. And I was afraid, not for myself, but for them. I prayed to every god I knew, every spirit I could think of. I begged for a miracle." She turned to face the crowd, her eyes blazing. "When the priest came with his knife, I thought my prayers had failed. I thought my children would die. But then this woman appeared." She pointed at Agadei. She came out of the darkness like a spirit herself. She grabbed the priest's hand. "She took my babies." And she ran. The crowd murmured. Some remembered that night, remembered the chaos, remembered the woman who had vanished into the evil forest and never returned. "For 7 years," Ayabo continued, "I believed my children were dead. I believed they had died in the forest, that their spirits haunted the darkness, that I would never see them again. I mourned them. I wept for them. I cursed the gods who had made me their mother." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice did not waver. "And now I see them alive, healthy, beautiful, and blessed with gifts I cannot explain. The gods did not curse me when I bore twins. They blessed me. They blessed all of us. And we were too blind, too trapped in our old ways to see it." The chief priest's face contorted with fury. "Lies. The woman is lying. She is trying to protect the one who stole from the shrine." "Silence." The Oba's voice cut through the priest's rant like a blade. The king rose from his throne, his legs strong beneath him, and walked to stand before Agadei and the twins. "Tell me," he said to Agadei, his voice soft but commanding. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." And Agadei did. She told them about the night she had heard Ayabo's screams. She told them about the priest's knife, about the baby's cries, about Ayabo's whispered plea. She told them about the evil forest, about the shrine of the forgotten, about the warmth that had spread through her body as she knelt before the spirits. She told them about the years of hiding, about the blessings that had begun to flow, about the old woman who had appeared to her that first night. She told them everything. When she finished, the square was silent. Even the birds had stopped singing. The Oba stood motionless, his face thoughtful. Then the chief priest spoke again, his voice dripping with scorn. "A pretty story, but it changes nothing. The law is the law. Twins are abominations. This woman stole from the shrine. They must all be punished." The Oba turned to face the priest. "Tell me," he said quietly, "why are twins abominations?" The priest blinked, caught off guard. It is the law. The ancestors decreed it. Twins are born of evil spirits." "Have you ever seen an evil spirit?" the Oba interrupted. "Have you ever spoken to one? Have you ever seen proof that twins are anything other than children?" The priest's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. It is tradition. It is what we have always believed. Tradition, the Oba repeated. He looked around the square, at the villagers who had gathered, at the women who had borne children in fear, at the men who had killed their own offspring because they were told it must be done. I will tell you what I see. I see a woman who was called Barren for 15 years, who was shunned and pitted and despised. I see a woman who risked her life to save 2 innocent babies. I see children who have been blessed by powers we do not understand. Powers that healed me, powers that call birds from the sky, powers that filled a hut with food and cloth and warmth. He turned back to the priest. And I see a man who has killed countless babies, who has filled the evil forest with the spirits of the innocent, who has used fear and tradition to maintain his power. Tell me, priest, which of these is the abomination? The verdict. The priest's face went pale beneath his ceremonial paint. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The Oba turned to the crowd. People of Agadei, for generations we have lived in fear. We have killed our own children because we were told they were evil. We have punished mothers for the crime of giving birth. We have filled the forest with spirits that cry out for justice. He gestured to Taiwo and Kahind. And yet, look at these children. Look at the blessings that have followed them. Look at the healing that flows from their hands. Are these the marks of evil? Or are they the signs that we have been wrong? An old woman stepped forward from the crowd. It was Mama Nkechi, the oldest person in the village, so ancient that no one remembered a time when she had not been there. She leaned on a staff and moved slowly, but her eyes were sharp and clear. I remember, she said, her voice thin but strong. When I was a girl, my mother gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They were taken to the forest and I never saw them again. My mother wept for years. She never recovered. She died with their names on her lips. The crowd was silent, listening. I have lived a long time, Mama Nkechi continued, long enough to see many things, and I have come to believe that the old ways are not always right. The gods we worship, do they truly demand the blood of babies? Or do we demand it ourselves, and blame it on the gods? She looked at the twins, and her face softened. These children are not a curse. They are a gift. And the woman who saved them. She is a hero, not a criminal. A murmur ran through the crowd. Other voices began to speak. Women who had lost twins. Men who had killed their own children. Elders who had enforced the law without ever questioning it. One by one, they told their stories. One by one, they confessed their grief. The chief priest stood alone, his power crumbling around him. The Oba raised his hand for silence. I have heard enough. Here is my judgment. He turned to Agadei. Agadei, you broke the law. You interfered with a sacred ritual. You stole what was claimed by the shrine. By the letter of our tradition, you deserve death. Agadei's heart clenched, but she did not look away. However, the Oba continued, the spirit of the law is not always the same as the letter. You acted not out of evil, but out of love. You saved lives that would have been lost, and you have raised these children with care and devotion. For that, you are not condemned. You are honored. He turned to the twins. Taiwo and Kahind, you are declared free. You are children of Agadei, entitled to all the rights and protections of any citizen. No one will harm you. No one will threaten you. And from this day forward, the killing of twins in this village is forbidden. The crowd gasped. Such a thing had never been spoken aloud. The Oba faced them, his expression stern. This is my decree. Any person who harms a twin, or who forces a mother to give up her twins, will face the same punishment they would have inflicted, death. The old law is ended. A new law begins today. The tears and the joy. What happened next was something no one in Agadei would ever forget. Ayabo rushed forward and fell to her knees before Taiwo and Kahind. She reached out as if to touch them, then stopped, afraid. I am your mother, she whispered. The one who bore you. I never wanted to let you go. I never wanted them to hurt you. Please forgive me. Kahind, who had always been the more intuitive of the two, stepped forward and placed her small hand on Ayabo's cheek. We know, she said softly. The spirits told us. They told us about the woman who loved us enough to let us go. They told us to wait. They told us we would meet you when the time was right. Taiwo joined his sister, kneeling beside Ayabo. You are our mother by blood, but Agadei is our mother by heart. We are blessed to have two mothers. That is not a curse. That is a gift. Ayabo broke down then, sobbing with a joy she had not felt in 7 years. She gathered her children into her arms, her children, alive and whole and loving, and held them as if she would never let go. Agadei watched, tears streaming down her own face. She had known this day might come. She had known that the twins might one day learn the truth, might one day meet the woman who had given them life. And yet, seeing them together, seeing the love that flowed between them, she felt no jealousy, only joy. The Oba approached her, his expression thoughtful. You have lost them, he said quietly. After 7 years of raising them, you have lost them to their birth mother. Agadei shook her head. I have not lost them. I have gained a sister. Look at them. They have enough love for both of us. And indeed, as if hearing her words, Taiwo looked up and called out, Mama Agadei, come meet our other mother. Agadei walked forward, and Ayabo rose to meet her. For a long moment the two women stood facing each other, the one who had given birth and the one who had saved. Then, without a word, they embraced. Thank you, Ayabo whispered. Thank you for saving them. Thank you for loving them. Thank you for everything. There is nothing to thank, Agadei replied. They saved me too. They gave my life meaning. They filled my empty womb with love. The charity, the story of Agadei and the twins spread far beyond Agadei. It traveled along the trade routes, passed from mouth to mouth until it reached the coastal cities and even the white missionaries who had begun to establish their churches in the region. People came from distant villages to see the twins, to witness their gifts, to seek Taiwo's healing and Kahaine's blessings. But Agadei did not let the attention change her. She remembered what it was like to be poor, to be shunned, to be alone. And so she used the blessings that flowed through her family to help others. When a widow came to the village with no food for her children, Agadei's yam barn, which never seemed to empty, provided enough to feed the family for months. When a hunter was gored by a wild boar and left for dead, Taiwo's healing hands closed his wounds and brought him back from the brink. When a drought threatened the crops, Kahaine called the rains, and the parched earth drank deep. Agadei established a shelter near the edge of the village, a place where women who had given birth to twins could come for safety, for support, for hope. She sent word to the surrounding villages that Agadei was now a place of refuge, that twins would be protected here, that no mother needed to fear. And they came. From far and wide they came. Women who had hidden their twins in the bush, feeding them in secret, terrified of discovery. Women who had been driven from their homes, their husbands, their lives. Women who had been told that their children were abominations, that they deserved to die. Agadei welcomed them all. Ayabo joined her in the work, and together they built a community. The shelter grew into a compound, the compound into a small village of its own. A village of twins and their mothers, a village of the rescued and the redeemed. The Oba, impressed by what he saw, granted them land and protection. He declared that Agadei would become known not for its fear of twins, but for its celebration of them. He established a festival, the Festival of the Blessed Two, to honor the twins who had survived and the mothers who had loved them. And every year at the festival, Agadei would tell the story. She would tell of the night she ran into the evil forest, of the shrine where she found warmth in the darkness, of the blessings that had flowed from that desperate act of love. She would tell of Taiwo and Kahaine, now grown into young adults, using their gifts to heal and bless. And she would tell of Ayabo, her sister in all but blood, who had taught her that love could multiply, not divide. The forgiveness. The chief priest did not survive the change. His power broken, his influence shattered. He retreated to his compound and rarely emerged. The villagers avoided him not out of fear, but out of disdain. They had seen the truth. They knew now that he had killed not for the gods, but for his own position. In the 3rd year after the Oba's decree, the priest fell ill. It was a wasting sickness, the kind that eats a person from the inside, leaving them weak and hollow. The village healers refused to treat him. They remembered the babies he had killed, the mothers he had punished. Let him suffer, they said. Let him die as his victims died. But Agadei heard of his illness, and her heart was troubled. She went to Taiwo, now 15 years old and more powerful than ever. "There is a man," she said, "who tried to kill you, who would have killed you if I had not stopped him. He is dying. The village will not help him. They say he deserves it." Taiwo looked at her with eyes that had seen into the hearts of many people. "What do you say, Mama?" Agadei was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I say that no one deserves to die alone and afraid. I say that if our blessings are real, they should be for everyone, even our enemies. I say that we should go to him." Taiwo smiled. "That is why I love you, Mama. You taught me that love is stronger than fear." Together, they went to the priest's compound. He was lying on a mat in the darkness, his body wasted, his eyes sunken. When he saw them enter, he tried to raise his hand, to curse them, to drive them away. But he had no strength left. "Why?" he whispered, his voice a rasp. "Why have you come? To watch me die? To gloat?" "No," Agadei said softly. "We have come to help you." She knelt beside him, and Taiwo did the same. The boy, no, the young man, placed his hands on the priest's chest and closed his eyes. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the priest gasped as warmth flooded his body, the same warmth Agadei had felt in the shrine so many years ago. He felt strength returning to his limbs, clarity returning to his mind, life returning to his failing organs. When Taiwo finally removed his hands, the priest sat up for the first time in weeks. He looked at his hands, his arms, his body, and wept. "Why?" he asked again, his voice broken. "After what I did, after what I tried to do, why would you save me?" Agadei looked at him with compassion. "Because I know what it is to be empty, to be so desperate for something, a child, power, meaning, that you lose sight of what is right. The spirits did not curse me when I stole the twins. They blessed me, and their blessing taught me that mercy is more powerful than revenge." The priest bowed his head. "I killed so many babies, so many mothers. I cannot undo what I did." "No," Agadei agreed. "You cannot. But you can spend the rest of your life making amends. You can teach others that the old ways were wrong. You can use your knowledge of the spirits to help, not harm." And so the priest, whose name, it turned out, was Obafemi, joined the community of the rescued. He became a keeper of the shrine, not to offer sacrifices of blood, but to tend the spirits of the twins who had died, to honor their memory, to ensure that they were not forgotten. He spent his remaining years teaching that the true abomination was not the birth of twins, but the killing of the innocent. The legacy. Years passed. The harmattan winds came and went, the rains fell and retreated, and the village of Agadei transformed. The old name, the one that had meant place of fear, was forgotten. In its place, the village became known as Ilomo, the home of children. Twins were no longer killed. They were celebrated. The festival of the Blessed Two grew into a major event, drawing visitors from across the region. Mothers who gave birth to twins were honored with gifts and praise songs, not punished with fines and exile. Taiwo and Kahind grew into adulthood, married, and had children of their own. And, as if the universe had a sense of humor, both of them gave birth to twins. Taiwo's wife delivered a set of boys, and Kahind delivered a set of girls. The compound where they lived, alongside Agadei and Ayabo, became known as the place of many blessings. Agadei lived to see her grandchildren, and her grandchildren's children. She grew old surrounded by love, surrounded by family, surrounded by the proof that her desperate act on that moonless night had been the right thing to do. On her deathbed, at an age so advanced that no one could remember exactly how old she was, she called Taiwo and Kahind to her side. "I am going to join the ancestors," she whispered. "I will see the spirits of the shrine, the ones who blessed us. I will thank them for what they gave us." Kahind wept, clutching her mother's hand. "We should thank you, Mama. You gave us life. No, Agadei said, smiling. You gave me life. You gave me purpose. You gave me love. A barren woman, they called me. A woman cursed by the gods. But look at me now, surrounded by children and grandchildren, loved by a village, remembered by history. She reached out and touched their faces one last time. Tell the story, she said. Tell it to your children and to their children. Tell them that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most forbidden places. Tell them that love is stronger than fear. Tell them that the twins were never a curse. And with those words, Agadei closed her eyes and joined the ancestors. The story continues. Today, if you travel to the region that was once the village of Agadei, you will find a thriving community. The old hut where Agadei first sheltered the twins has been preserved as a shrine. Not a place of fear, but a place of hope. Pilgrims come from across Nigeria and beyond to visit the site, to pray for children, to seek blessings for their families. In the center of the town stands a statue. It depicts a woman in a simple wrapper, her arms cradling two tiny infants. At her feet, an inscription reads, "To Agadei, who was called Barren, but who became the mother of nations. She taught us that love is the greatest blessing of all." And every year, during the festival of the Blessed Two, the oldest living twin in the community stands before the gathered crowd and tells the story. They tell of the night of screams, of the dash through the evil forest, of the warmth that came from the shrine. They tell of the years of hiding, the years of blessing, the years of transformation. They tell of the woman who risked everything for love. And when the story ends, the crowd erupts in cheers. For Agadei, for the twins, for the mothers who loved them, and for the ancestors who blessed them all. Because in the end, the twins were never a curse. They were the greatest blessing the village had ever known. The end.